right, so I let the hard ground, the liquid hard ground, dry on the plate. It didn't take very long because I had it out in the open air and it's kind of warm out today. If you need to accelerate the drying time, you could always heat it up for a little bit on a hot plate. But I also find that just letting it air dry is fine too. So you'll see that in my setup here, which is going to be obviously different from what you are using in the classroom or what you might be using at home, I cleaned out the tray that I previously used to coat my plate with the hard ground. And I cleaned it out with first dry paper towel, then a little bit of Gamsol on a paper towel, and then I degreased it with some vinegar, some just white vinegar from the grocery store. Again, this piece of grate that I have from a shelving unit, I turned it upside down now so that it gives me like a little bit of a handle so I can raise my plate out of the hot water when it's time to do so. Otherwise, you can just leave it in there till the water gets cool enough to put your hand in. So I'm going to put my plate here, and I have a hot water kettle. I heated up water and I filled it all the way. So this is one of those electric kettles. And I'm just going to slowly pour the water over. And you can see that the sugar lift is already dissolving. Okay. And I would avoid pouring the water directly on really sensitive areas. So just let it fill up the tray, okay? I'm just going around the edges of the plate. And I'm just letting it get submerged in the hot water, okay? And there you go. So the image has already appeared. You'll notice that there is a little bit of texture in some areas where there were like bubbles that were drying. And so you can kind of see the edges of those bubbles. They create sort of a crackly kind of effect, which personally I don't really mind, but if you wanted to get rid of them, you could actually see about wiping them away with a brush. So like I'll try right over here. They're so delicate, they're like spider web almost. And so some of them you can wipe away because the hot water sort of reactivates the hard ground in the sense that it makes it gooey again. You don't want to touch any areas that are really thick. So like this, you know, you're going to start picking up hard ground and then redepositing it back down. Okay, so like here, I'm picking it up on my brush, and then if I go in this open area, I could actually tap it back down again. Okay, so if you want it to be exactly the way that it looks now, I wouldn't touch it, and I wouldn't even brush over it. Some people recommend taking a really soft brush and lightly agitating the water. I would say to avoid doing that if you can, because you could actually smear some of the hard ground that gets soft and sticky again. If you have areas that are a little bit difficult and they're not lifting up, you could agitate with a very soft brush if you wanted to, just in specific areas. But again, you know, with this process, with sugar lift, you can't always control very well how much lifts away. Sometimes some areas lift away that you didn't intend for, so that's a problem too. So I'm seeing over here, maybe I had some areas that didn't get fully covered with the hard ground, you know, so there's some smudges over here, maybe of some of the sugar lift that got in the margins. Anything that pulls away that you didn't intend, if it's something small or just sort of like a minor detail, you can go back later and cover that up with hard ground. You can paint it on with a really fine brush and just use it as a stop out. You can use the liquid hard ground as a stop out, or if you're using the red stop out liquid, the stop out varnish in the classroom, you know, that works equally well. So you can go back if there are certain edges that you want to be crisper, you can go in and alter that. If there are details inside some of these open areas that you actually want to cover up again, you can do that. And I can also mask out any of these mistakes that are in the margins if I don't want them to actually etch or take any tone when I put the plate in the ferric chloride. Okay. So now what I want to do, I don't necessarily want to leave this in here too long. I mean, it lifted up right away. And typically, you know, if you leave your sugar lift, I mean, if you leave your sugar lift on the plate too long, or like I said, if you let it really cook onto the plate because you put it onto a hot plate, it might be more difficult to lift up when you pour the hot water into your tray. But you know, this lifted up right away, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to carefully reach in here and I'm going to pull this up, and I'm just going to get this out of the water. The other really nice thing about this piece of shelving unit that I just happen to have lying around is it has a rung over here and over here, so it fits this plate really perfectly. So I'm just going to sort of take this out and prop it over here to the side so that it can cool off in the air. And I'm just going to leave it alone. I'm not going to disturb it. The plate is going to be really, really hot because copper conducts heat very easily. So you definitely don't want to touch it for a few minutes until it comes back down to room temperature. And then the water itself, you can see that the water, you know, it has a little bit of hard ground, oily residue floating on the surface. You could skim that off and, you know, reheat the water or pour the water out. You know, I wouldn't really worry about it too much, okay? So that is the process. The next thing that I would do with this plate, now that the areas have exposed from where I'd painted the sugar lift on, once it completely dries, I'm going to decide if I want to put on a spray paint aquatint or if I just want to do an open bite. Okay, so those are two options that can work in different ways, but they can be equally successful depending on your objective with this process. So that will come in the next video.